This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Jeanne Bonds, former mayor of Knightdale and political analyst, Becki Gray with the Carolina Journal, and Chris Fitzsimon, also known as Chris Fitzsimon, with NC Policy Watch. We got a really good show for you this week that includes a discussion of Governor McCrory's proposals to reform Medicaid, whether we should repeal our renewable energy standards, and if we get around to it, we'll talk about public school reforms. So let's get started. Regardless of your political persuasion, you have to admit Governor Pat McCrory has been thrown into the deep end very early in his administration. One of the biggest issues he faces regards Medicaid, which consumes some $13 billion of state and federal funding. Last week, the governor announced sweeping reforms to Medicaid, proposals to move patients to a variety of managed care contractors, a move DHH Secretary Aldona Voss says would help lower administrative costs while at the same time eliminating many of the huge cost overruns we've experienced in recent years. The change would require federal approval and legislative approval and is already meeting opposition from many who say that North Carolina already has a nationally recognized program, Community Care North Carolina, that saved the state millions of Medicaid dollars. Chris, as we understand the proposal, a competitive bidding process would provide a variety of options and allow Medicaid patients to choose among them. Already the North Carolina Medical Society, the Hospital Association, have announced opposition to these reforms. What's your assessment?
Well, I think we don't know all the details. I think there are several things we do know. My big fear is this is going to turn into what didn't work with mental health reform. There was a time in mental health reform where people who had been getting mental health services from the state were then asked to choose among a lot of providers with not a lot of information, people who weren't really qualified to make that decision. Chaos ensued, and we're still trying to get recover from that. I thought it was very interesting on the day Governor McCrory announced his plan. Senator Richard Burr, also a Republican, was in North Carolina, came back to the state to give Community Care of North Carolina an award for saving money, for providing quality service. And it's not just the Medical Society who's opposed to this or the hospitals. Representative Nelson Dollar, probably the most knowledgeable Health and Human Services Republican member of the State House and a member of the House leadership, the senior appropriations chair, he's expressed grave concern to a constituent saying, Community Care is working wonderfully. Why in the world would you want to turn this over to private, for-profit, out-of-state managed care companies? All that being said, Medicaid clearly has some issues with efficiencies. Clearly, the audits have identified some issues, but it doesn't get much publicity anymore. And Representative Dollar has pointed it out. Medicaid spending in North Carolina grew less than any other state in the country for several years in a row up until recently. Community Care of North Carolina sounds a lot like what Governor McCrory is proposing, which I think is what the confusion is. It's a holistic approach. It treats patients as individuals and helps them navigate the healthcare system. So to me, the biggest question is why would we move away from Community Care of North Carolina?
John, one of the things that was interesting is that Secretary Voss put out an RFI asking groups that were involved in, interested in, concerned about Medicaid to submit proposals, recommendations, and so forth like that. Within a week after the time they were all received, they came out with this new program. Did they get ample seeing and hearing?
Oh, they got lots of response. That's why this.
No, I'm saying,
put together.
Did they get considered properly?
They got a week. He's saying they only got a week.
They only got a week before they announced the reforms.
They had solicited input from these providers and participants weeks before. It was not a single week. And they got lots of information. And what they determined is that Community Care of North Carolina, which is a nonprofit that was, until recently, it was actually a state agency. It was a part of HHS. It was spun off as a nonprofit. And it has some advantages for some patients, but it doesn't have a financial incentive to manage the care. The fundamental problem here is that North Carolina's Medicaid costs, even though we had a brief period of moderation, followed by and preceded by rapid growth, the real problem is North Carolina's Medicaid costs are very high by national standards, 18% higher than the national average, 26% higher than the southern average. It's just way out of whack. So we could have a long period of slow growth and still not get us to the national average. So we've got to make some significant changes now.
Jeanne, the program that is being proposed, are the other states that have tried this? My understanding is that Oregon, Kentucky, Oklahoma have gone to similar type programs like this. with managed care. Any comment on what the results have been in these other states?
Well, I've only read a little bit about the Oregon program, but I think what I'm perplexed about with this plan is that we have an audit that talks about specific costs, like what you were saying, but this plan doesn't address those costs. If you go through the audit line by line and then you look at what the governor's proposing, some of the things he's proposing don't address the cost overrun that are in the audit. So I think a lot of it's still unclear to me. There's unanswered questions, and regardless of whether other states have proposed this or not, it seems like there's still not enough specifics on what the governor is talking about.
Becki, as I understand the proposal, these managed care companies would be given a certain amount of money per patient. And they would be expected to pay the basic medical costs for this patient, which would limit the cost overruns that the state would have. Now, the question is, what happens after the initial term of the contract during this time? Because these are for-profit companies. If they don't make money, are the costs going to go up?
Well, there's an incentive for them to keep their cost within the parameters that are set by the government. And I think that this is a movement to get the administrative cost to contain the cost of Medicaid. I think that's what this is all about. So that very program that you have described of keeping the cost contained, this is the amount of money that they get to treat these patients. And if they go over that, they take the risk of going over that. And this is a way to get the cost under control. That's what this whole program is about, is the cost management of Medicaid, providing the services, but also to provide some certainty for budgeting. The last several years we've had huge Medicaid overruns in the middle of the year. There's a scramble to find the money, and so this is an effort to eliminate that problem too, so that there's some more consistency in the services.
I want to pick back up on this topic after these messages. If you enjoy keeping up with what's happening in North Carolina, you'll enjoy our website, ncspin.com. and NC Spin on Facebook all during the week. Our panelists and viewers sound off with their opinions of the week's events. So be sure to be part of the conversation at ncspin.com and NC Spin on Facebook. More Medicaid reforms in a moment.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agricultural workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch a Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthierNC.com.
Raffaldini Vineyards is Chianti in the Carolinas. Enjoy Italian-style wines, breathtaking views, cultural events, and much more. Visit raffaldini.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
The topic is Medicaid reform, and we continue our discussion on this. Becki, the governor wants to implement this program beginning in July 2015. Now, this is a major effort, and there are a lot of people questioning this time frame, particularly politically, because it will be just 2 to 3 months before all of our legislators are standing for elections. So if there are problems in getting this thing implemented or in problems of having it work, some of them could be taken to heat for this, couldn't they?
Well, they could. I think the incentive to get it underway and get it moving is a budgetary incentive. We've got to get this under control. We've got to get the cost contained. Medicaid is 15% of our budget, state budget, and it's the fastest growing part of our budget. So there's a real need to get a hold of this and get it under control. That's why I think he has set these deadlines. They're aggressive, but I think they're doable. I think he has every intention of doing that, getting this under control.
There are several steps that the reforms have to go through to get to 2015.
Exactly.
They've got to get the legislature to sign off on it, and there is some discussion about that and probably not full agreement yet.
And I want to talk about that in a second.
They have to get the federal government to sign off on it through a waiver process. Again, most states have managed care for Medicaid patients. Most Medicaid patients in the country are already managed the way North Carolina is doing it. So we're not inventing anything new. D.C. has authorized these kinds of waivers rather often in the past. But you have to be specific about what you're going to use the savings for example, to qualify for some of these federal waivers. In addition to that, they have to write some as you allude to, some very complex contracts. Medicaid is not a program. It's really 3 or 4 different programs. And the area where North Carolina's actually out of whack cost-wise would be in the women and children, mostly parents and children section, the fairly low cost, and then the disability section. Right. Actually, our elder care, our seniors who are in nursing homes on Medicaid, their costs are relatively low by regional standards, or at least lower than average. So the point is, they have to be specific about the target health outcomes that will be part of adjudicating these contracts.
Chris, John says most states have some sort of managed care program, but if that's the case, why is CCNC being held up as such a model across the United States?
Well, I mean, CCNC is a managed care program. It's just one that's run by a separate nonprofit, not a for-profit entity. And I think that's, managed care is a complicated, it has a lot of different forms. And I think the CCNC is a form that's working well. And I'm distressed a little bit that we're going to be abandoning that in favor of
because what's going to happen there?
We're not abandoning
Well, we're not going to let it compete against for-profit companies.
And other nonprofit.
Well,
in fact, most of these provider networks will probably be a combination of some kind of insurance and in providers themselves.
A lot of the people pushing this are national groups. WellPoint, for example, just bought AmeriGroup, which is a company out of Virginia that was quoted in they've submitted a lot of comments. They want to get in on the business. A lot of for-profit companies are going to get in this. I think it's also important anytime we talk about Medicaid to remind people what it actually is. Right now, it's health care for the most vulnerable people in North Carolina. John mentioned that seniors, people with disabilities, people who are blind, children, pregnant mothers. It's not a healthcare system in North Carolina yet, or I don't know if it will be, for individuals who don't have health insurance. And it's actually, the reason it's going up is because healthcare costs across the country are going up. It's the fastest growing part of the budget because healthcare costs are going up everywhere.
Well, and we have a growing population. We have more people that are in need because the economy is bad.
Jeanne, I think the big question that you alluded to it a little earlier is, can we get this through the legislature? Is the governor going to be able to get this passed? Nelson Dollar has already admitted that he's got some grave concerns about it.
Well, you said in your opening that this was a huge task for the governor, but this isn't new. The discussions about this started in 2011. They started talking about how much this was going to cost. So really someone running for governor needed to have a plan for it in place, and I would have thought there would have been some coordination with the legislature, but I think the governor's going to face some challenges from some of the people who are very knowledgeable in the legislature, like Nelson Dollar.
I do think it's worth noting, and maybe it's because the plan is early, and maybe it's because the governor's still relatively new, but in the past, when there would be a major initiative, and this is a major initiative, a governor, especially of one party, would generally have the legislative leadership of his party with him at the podium. That this would be, here's my proposal, I've run it by the Speaker and the President Pro Tem, I've got the appropriations people bought into this, and we're going to
people in the healthcare industry, too.
Right. No, but I'm really thinking about getting it through the legislature now. It's a little bit unusual, I think, to have a major initiative sort of come out of just the governor's office when his party controls the State House and Senate, and folks like Nelson Dollar, you would have thought, would have been part of that discussion and been on board before it was announced.
Well, so, Becki, I go back to the same question I asked Jeanne that she never did quite answer, is can the governor get this through the legislature?
I think they're going to have to. Again, it goes back to a budget question, and they're going to have to contain these costs and get this under control. So I think there's a real incentive on behalf of the legislature, who is going to be writing the budget, and will have a budget shortly for the next 2 years, and then after that. So I think that's where the incentive comes.
All right, final question. I want to group several things together, get all of you to answer this. At the end of the day, the question is, how are these reforms going to impact patients, doctors, care providers, and the taxpayers? John, I'll start with you since we started with you.
Well, I would assume, based upon what's going on in other states in this area and the best practices, that you'd save money. You're going to have at least a neutral effect on patient care, if not better patient care, again, based on what's going on elsewhere. You are going to have some transition issues. Making the 2015 deadline might be a challenge, and you're going to have to get some buy-in from the legislature. Providers who are currently in control of the single contractor that's really theirs are not going to be happy about competition, but that's what we need in order to get the cost down.
Jeanne, your comment on that?
Well, I think that I'm concerned about the patients because I think CCNC does a pretty good job matching the needs with the patients now. I think that's a good model that we have. So I think there's going to be some confusion among the patients. As far as going back to the legislature and getting it through, they'll get something through. I'm with Chris. I don't know why there wasn't a come together of the minds at the beginning. I think that there's going to be some resistance to his plan.
All right. Reforms impacting patients, care providers, and taxpayers. Becki?
Well, for the taxpayers, I think they're interested in containing these costs, getting these under control, and of course, providing patients with good quality care, but at a cost that is reasonable and a cost that is expected so that you can make long-term plans. That's been the problem with Medicaid for the last 10, 15 years is the costs have been out of whack. And there's just been a lot of confusion as how those are going to be paid, big overruns, huge mismanagement, very large administrative cost, and all of those things need to be taken care of.
Chris?
Well, I think it's worth noting before we leave the topic, a lot of the cost overruns were things that the General Assembly were told about by the Perdue administration and Secretary Lanier Kanzler, who stood before committee after committee saying, you're saying save this amount of money. We simply can't do it without cutting services or cutting reimbursement to providers. They said, don't do either one of those. And then he said, well, then we can't make the savings. And then they're being criticized now for not making the savings that they said they couldn't make. So that's important. The second thing is I think patient care, the big worry is community. That's what community care wins awards for, taking care of patients. So I hope that that's not lost. And one interesting state to look at is Florida, which has a version of this in place. Roughly 58%, only 57 or 58% of doctors offer services to Medicaid patients. In North Carolina, it's 75%. So people on Medicaid are going to have fewer places to go to the doctor.
And reimbursement rates are going to go down.
And that's why.
All right. After these messages, we're going to talk about renewable energy. Stay with us.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Not all high school graduates go to college. Not all employers need college graduates. Are North Carolina's public schools preparing graduates with the skills employers need now? Join the discussion. Visit nceducate.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
In 2007, North Carolina passed the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, which required investor-owned utility companies to generate 12.5% of their retail electric sales from renewable energy by 2021, and municipal utilities and co-ops to meet a target of 10% by 2018. A bill filed last month would repeal these targets. Those wanting to keep the standard say we need to decrease our dependency on fossil fuel energy, and a new industry has seen almost $2 billion in investments, created thousands of jobs, and is going to clean the environment. Surveys have shown, or opponents rather to the standard, say the jobs claimed are exaggerated. We're paying more for electricity because of these subsidies, given the new sources like solar and wind generation. And a recent survey found 83% of North Carolinians, including 76% of Republicans, want the state to seek more clean and renewable energy sources. I want to ask the same question to Becki and Jeanne because both of you have taken strong and different positions on this issue on our NC Spin Perspectives page on your website. Becki, your organization commissioned the Beacon Hill Institute to study the renewable energy economics, and it said that claims of job creations and savings are exaggerated. You're in favor of this repeal. Tell us why.
Well, I am in favor of the repeal, and mainly because the mandate for renewable energy sources is expensive, it's unreliable, and it's inefficient. We've seen energy costs go up because of this, and as taxpayers and as citizens of North Carolina, we actually pay these higher electricity costs in a number of ways. We pay it as homeowners, as when we pay our electric bill at the end of the month as families and individuals. We pay it as taxpayers because the government has a big electric bill and that has to be paid and the taxpayers pay that. And then we pay it again as consumers of business services and goods. When the cost of electricity for business goes up, they pass that along to the customer, so we pay it that way. It needs to be repealed. This is not a function of government to mandate expensive sources of energy and then expect the the taxpayers and ratepayers to pay that. And Tom, it reminds me a bit about the sign that you see at federal state parks, and don't feed the animals, don't feed the bears. And it's really what we've been doing with these subsidies, is feeding these energy companies solar, wind, biomass. And what's happened, there was an editorial this week in the Wall Street Journal from a CEO of a wind company that said what these subsidies have done is they have stopped innovation in these energy sources. Some of the wind farms are going up in places that they should not be going up in. You see these energy companies spending a lot of time playing politics rather than innovations for research and development and technology that would really make them competitive.
Jeanne, you're in favor of keeping these targets. Tell us why.
Well, we've been feeding the big bears for a century, called fossil fuels and nuclear. Our taxes and our electricity bills are loaded with costs generated by subsidies at the federal level for those programs. The whole idea of a subsidy is you put that in place for an emerging industry to help create a market and make some type of change through innovation. We've been subsidizing fossil fuels and nuclear for a very long time, so there is no innovation in that, and we continue to pay for it. This is a great program. All of the utilities sat at a table in 2007 and agreed to do this. If you ask Jim Rogers at Duke, he will tell you it's a great program. He would do it willingly, except that his shareholders want to make money, so they want to continue with the programs they already have in place. It's a good program. It'll eventually create jobs, and it'll create innovation.
Well, Jeanne raises a good point. If this is such a good program, John, why aren't these companies doing it themselves? Innovate these renewable energy targets and increasing it themselves to make profits on it themselves, these for-profit utility companies. Why aren't they doing it?
Well,
they're required to right now.
Yeah,
obviously.
I mean, look, the power companies are being forced to buy expensive energy. If they weren't being forced to buy expensive energy, they would buy cheaper energy, like natural gas. Okay? This is really not that complicated. Now, the solar costs have been coming down some. Some of the other costs haven't, but natural gas has really come down. So the economics of this are pretty simple.
But we subsidize the exploration of natural gas.
We really don't. Okay?
We did initially.
We subsidize everything.
You can't subsidize everything. That's actually meaningless. If you subsidize every form of energy,
you need to read the 2005 energy bill.
What I'm saying is you can't subsidize everything because something has to subsidize something else.
Then you should advocate ending the subsidies on fossil fuels and nuclear.
I do.
And then letting emerging industries have the subsidies for a little while to create new markets.
Absolutely, you should get rid of all energy subsidies, but the cost per kilowatt hour, the subsidy per kilowatt hour for fossil fuels is very small. The cost per kilowatt hour for solar is exorbitant. So they're not even remotely in the same
Chris,
ballpark.
What's the difference between these subsidies and, for instance, when Duke Power or Progress Energy or whatever utility company gets ready to build a new power plant, and they build the cost of that into the rate base, and the consumers pay for the cost of that construction in the rate base? What's the difference between that and these subsidies?
They want to do that actually more with the construction while in progress bill that they've been pushing for a long time. What's fascinating about this. We haven't even talked about another segment of this, which puts Governor McCrory in an odd spot. There is an economic benefit to the renewables energy. This is an industry, a blossoming industry in North Carolina. He has talked about it himself as a growth sector for North Carolina's economy. That's why this bill passed a House committee with one vote, with prominent Republicans like Ruth Samuelson from Charlotte, a very powerful member of the House, a close ally of Speaker Tillis and Governor McCrory, voting against it. So this is going to be a tough, long battle. I don't think this is an easy win for folks who are trying to repeal this.
All right, we're going to come back and finish up this topic after these messages.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch a Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthiernc.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
I'm sure we're going to be talking about this renewable energy issue again on another NC Spend program, but I want to get our panelists' final comments on it in this show. Jeanne?
All right, if you talk to national security experts, they will talk to you about diversifying our energy base. This goes back to the 80s when President Reagan cut the R&D budget for renewables. That brings us to this point. Each state is implementing a renewable portfolio standard appropriate for that state.
All right, John, final comments.
The bill that's now in the General Assembly is actually a compromise bill that doesn't repeal the mandate. It actually lets it go up to 6%, and it goes away in 2018, and there'll be a study. It's because it's a compromise bill, I think it's likely to pass.
Chris, final comment.
27 states have this renewable energy standard. Some states have a higher one than North Carolina. I think this will be a much more contentious issue than you think because there's strong business support for it.
Becki?
North Carolina is the only state in the Southeast that has this mandate. Other states have chosen not to do this. Our neighbors have chosen not to do this. The bill that's in the General Assembly, as John mentioned, is a compromise bill. I think that we may see this. What it does is it extends these mandates for until 2018. So it gives these companies 10 years to get off on their own to function without the subsidies. And then it would sunset in 2018 the way the bill's written now.
Right.
That seems to me to be a good compromise.
Half minute left. Under the circumstances, John, you alluded to the fact that will be a renewable energy bill passed. What's it going to look like?
Well, I think it'll be similar to the bill they have now, and there's been signals from the from the governor's office and from the Senate that there's some arrangement.
Jeanne, you agree with that?
I think the governor and the House are going to affect this bill and change it. I don't think it's going to be like it is now, and I think we will have an RPS.
I think something's going to pass, unfortunately.
I think something's going to pass, and I think whatever passes, there will be a study committee in it. So like you said, we're going to be talking about this for a while.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. Next week, we'll examine the new proposals to overhaul our Commerce Department. We'll talk about school reform and mental health checks. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch us at NC Spin on Facebook. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.